It's very nice to have you visiting Stony Brook and to have an opportunity to talk to you about your father, your recollections of him and of his career. Your father was born in 1907, 1908?
Yes, that's right. It was a classic Victorian-style family where the expectation was that things would be done properly and that there was quite a lot of control, I think, in the family. But the children were basically raised by nannies, and obviously his mother, my grandmother, who I knew well, was always there in the house, but the children were basically in the upstairs floor.
Yes. How many brothers and sisters did
he had? Two elder sisters, Winnie and Marion, an elder brother, who was number 3, and my father very rapidly after that was number 4. Yeah. He was only, I think, 11 months younger than his elder brother. And then he had a younger brother and a younger sister. So there were 6 of them altogether. My grandfather, who I never knew, he died in 1927, I think. He was president of the Royal College of Surgeons of England. He was surgeon to the royal family. He was a very high-ranking surgeon in the Allied forces during the First World War. And he made many distinguished contributions. I remember one of the things that he did was he introduced the steel helmet. He recognized there were so many head injuries that were fatal, which a similar degree of injury on a limb would have been nothing more than a flesh wound.
He also did some things about the organization of so on.
Field
I think
hospitals.
That was very important.
Very important. Yes. What he did was what Colonel Potter did in MASH. He was the first Colonel Potter. He developed MASH units, under canvas, surgical units, right up by the battle line. And they would do really major surgery right up near the front line. The story in the family is that he came back a changed man. He didn't return to Britain for 4 years. He did have 4 years of secure attachment with his nursemaid, Minnie. I believe that was a very positive experience. The fact that he lost the nanny when he was 4 because she moved on to a better job doesn't take away that sense of having known a secure attachment bond with somebody who I think he loved. It's said by his sister Evelyn that John was her favorite. And when it's known that somebody was her favorite, chances are that she was his favorite. And I think that was, and we know she was the only person in the household who consistently played with the children. She greatly enjoyed playing with the children, and nobody else did. And I think that's a very important part of what my father experienced positively from his nursemaid.
His siblings were his playmates for the most part?
Yeah.
Were there other children around?
Well, particularly his elder brother, 11 months older, Tony. And Tony was a good uncle. Yeah, I enjoyed him. And he and my father were the closest of friends and the most intense rivals. There was this classic sibling bond. And they remained so all their life. And they phoned and they met and they holidayed and they had lots of things in common. And they were very like each other. They physically looked similar. Father's recollections of his childhood engagements with older generation were with his maternal grandfather. His maternal grandfather was a sporting parson, and he was always known in the family as Grampy. And this man was a major force in my father's life because he taught, as far as I can make out, my father these field sports that my father so dearly loved, and a lot of the natural history was through him.
So the bird watching
the
and the
bird
grouse
watching
hunting
and the grouse shooting and all of these activities. There are many, many stories that I recollect my father telling about Grampy, not about his own father. His father only saw the children for an hour on Sunday. Didn't see father all week.
Yes. Well,
He had an absent father to that effect.
Were there great expectations placed on his brother and himself because of the father's great accomplishments?
I think they would have put expectations on themselves.
To
I think
rise to the father's accomplishments.
I think my father would have liked to have pleased his own father.
I see.
But I think that his father was rather remote. I mean, there's a nice record of old Sir Anthony being highly regarded with great affection by his professional colleagues. And I think he rather had two personalities. That there is a tendency for him to see his professional colleagues in a supportive and comradely light. And I think he found that when he switched to family mode, something else kicked in a way that I don't think was so comfortable.
Interesting.
Isn't it? And I think there's little elements of that about my father. I hear such warm comments. My father was a warm man. He was a nice man. He was a generous man. He was a good father, but he wasn't a cuddly father. Yes. His behavior was entirely appropriate for professional colleagues, but it was a little bit British Reserve at home.
Yes. He didn't initially go to medical training, did he? There were plans that he would have a military career.
Yeah, naval. His schooling was at Dartmouth Naval College. And when he realized that that meant going to sea in ships that was going to be very structured, he saw it as very boring. No. And because you've got a subsidized place at school, at Dartmouth, you were expected to work to enter the Navy, and that's why they were paying your tuition fees. So his father had to buy him out. The way I describe his work is that he trained to become a medical doctor. He specialized and became a psychiatrist. Simultaneously, he trained and eventually qualified as a psychoanalyst. The war came along, you see.
Yeah, it was disrupted.
The war came along and it just swathed through. But he met some very, very able psychologists who moved to the Tabby with him. And they sort of rejuvenated the Tavistock Clinic after the war as a group that came in. Jock Sutherland, Eric Trist, I can't remember all the names of the people, but they were very, very important. When he went to Cambridge, after a couple of years there, he took a year out. He went, and the origins of his work was that he went to work at a school for maladjusted children, which mostly meant maladjusted boys.
Was it called Priory Gate?
Priory Gate, quite right. When my father was at Priory Gate with these maladjusted boys, he came across a volunteer who had a boy in the school. And this chap, John Alford, said to my father, you know, there's something strange about these boys. They've all got some form of loss in their family. And I think what you should do is you should go back to medical school and finish your degree. He'd taken a year out, remember? He should study to become a psychoanalyst. And that's basically what my father did. Now, it may look as if my father spotted what it was that was going on, but it's actually quite, I mean, he told me that John Alford was the man who drew it to his attention and that John Alford saw the significance of these broken home situations. And that usually meant death or divorce. And that was the basis on which 44 Juvenile Thieves was.
You think this experience turned him toward children?
Why did he go to work at Priory Gate?
Yes. It's not the direction the father's successes would suggest.
The father would have turned in his grave had he known that my father was going into anything to do with psychiatry, psychoanalysis. He was a surgeon, general surgeon, and the idea of messing with someone's mind, I think, would have been a complete anathema. And I think that in many ways my father was freed by the untimely death of my grandfather, who died of pneumonia, which he wouldn't have died of nowadays. He was a fit and healthy man.
How old was your father at that time?
Well, I think it was about 1928, so he'd have been about 21.
Yes. Oh, so
quite
very
young.
early in his
Well,
education.
his father was a very old man when he became a father.
Oh, I see.
Born in 1856, so that he was 50 by the time my father was born.
After he finished his medical training and went to his psychoanalytic training, he had his analysis with Joan Riviere. Is that right?
And he was supervised. I think he was supervised by two people, and I don't think I've got this quite straight. But Melanie Klein was certainly one of the supervisors. Pretty sure it took him 7 years before he was certified as a psychoanalyst. And the story that he told me is that he would not go along with what it was that he was being taught. And he was told, but that's because you don't understand it. When you understand it, then you will go along with it. And then we can make you a psychoanalyst. Melanie Klein had some really first-class facets to her work, which was of great value. And father always, calls himself an object relations theorist. But he did have his battles later on. I know that my mother was very cross that he had spent all the money that he had been given from his family as an allowance on his psychoanalytic training, and that she had a small amount of money that they basically had to live on.
There was a key issue, I think, during his training over whether Melanie Klein would allow him to talk to the families, observe the children in the here and now, in their homes, the things that Mary Ainsworth eventually did so successfully.
She was determined not to, and I often wonder what Melanie Klein's personal agendas were that made her so resistant and so hostile to the ideas of the idea of bringing in more of the family. But I think my father's early childhood experiences with losing his nanny gave him a sixth sense that something was going on.
Was there a chance that she could have turned him away from it?
No, he was his own man. I mean, he really was his own man. If he felt that something fitted his experience and his insight and his gut feelings, he would follow it. The character and the determination and the single-mindedness to run it, to go against the flow is, I think, one of the things that he had in abundance. I think he was actually rather naive. I think he felt that if somebody came up with a solid explanation, which was, in his view, clearly better than the present explanation, everybody would welcome him with open arms. Yeah. How wrong can you be? It turned out to be extremely contentious from every different angle.
Did he maintain contact with the people who'd given him the psychoanalytic training, or did he move on after that?
Well, of course, no, he didn't. He was training secretary of the British Psychoanalytic Society after the war. So, I suppose he had to be involved.
Professional contacts, I see.
Yeah. And he hosted a summer party every year, actually I remember well, in our house, in our garden party, for all the staff of the Tavistock, because he had a big house, we had a big house. But Melanie Klein and even Anna Freud joined forces. They were not apparently bosom friends, but they nevertheless joined forces against Father when he came up with the...
Well, I can see how it could be difficult, though, as people are often very close to the people who trained them.
Yeah, it could be difficult. I would think it's unlikely that he... I mean, well, he didn't get on with them, so he definitely plowed his own furrow.
Do you know if he ever met Sigmund Freud?
Don't think he did, no.
I don't think he did.
Don't think so. He never discussed it, if he did. No, I think he didn't.
Yes, I mean, he would have had an opportunity for a brief
period. Yeah, there would have been,
as a young man.
Yeah.
Your father seemed comfortable with philosophy of science, exploring into cognitive psychology. He obviously was interested in natural history. People would mention things like control systems, and he didn't avoid something new. It seemed like a wide range of exploration for someone whose training might have tended to narrow him and whose ability profile might have made him a little avoidant of new topics.
He was somebody who was very, very methodical and thoughtful and open to a terrifically wide range of ideas. I mean, he really was, in many ways, the whole package. Most of the family have very good interpersonal skills. Yeah. They're quite widespread through the family. A lot of teachers, a lot of professionals. Not many people making buckets of money, but a lot of people interacting at a professional level with skills,
connecting
and networking.
It seems likely that that same facility would make for a good child psychiatrist. Someone with good eyes to see what's going on.
He never claimed to be a good therapist.
Yes.
And he didn't do a lot of either child or adult psychotherapy. He never did sort of 8 hours a day. Yeah. That was not what he did. He had a few patients that he saw for a long time, and I think was successful. But his real passion, I think, was synthesis of ideas. He wrote a book called Personal Aggression and War, and he wrote that with his best friend, Evan Durbin. And that took a lot of effort and research and work, and he dearly loved Evan. And it was a tragedy when he died after the war, and I knew Evan a bit, but I was young, and he felt that was probably the biggest loss that he mourned most, because he didn't have many intimate losses young. You know, no children died, no siblings died until ripe old ages, and he didn't have these big losses. I think he didn't grieve his father's death, and his mother died age 90.
That would be unusual in those days. People would experience
losses I think so.
Throughout their lives.
Father used to say that people thought that the more losses you had, the easier it got. And he said, we've got no evidence for that. In fact, if anything, it's completely the reverse.
Let's turn a little bit to the part of his career when he began to work on his ideas about attachment. Do you know whether this came to him slowly, whether it was a product of just hard, continuous work, or was there sort of an aha moment that then took him away from everything else and absorbed him?
There were a series of aha moments, and some of them I can remember. But primarily, it was 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration. Very, very determined, long-term hard work. 44 juvenile thieves, sort of looking at maternal deprivation. 1951, World Health Organization, maternal care and mental health, made into the book Child Care and the Growth of Love. That monograph became pretty much 90% of the text for the popular book. Maternal deprivation. He then, in 1957, had a sabbatical year in Palo Alto, just south of San Francisco, where he had the opportunity to amass all his thoughts, and the outcome of that was a paper called The Nature of the Child's Tie to His Mother. That was the start of attachment theory, the child's tie, the nature of the child's tie to his mother. So this was an evolutionary process.
What might have been some of the aha moments?
Well, I remember one was that I remember we were on a walk together. I was about 17, so it was about 1956. He said, you know this business about the child feeling frantically upset if they can't find their mum, if they get lost, and how it's like the demons are after them. Well, it's like it's the same feeling that we get as adults if a loved one dies. There is the same sort of sense, and I think grief and mourning is very closely allied to the sense of can't find mummy when I'm a baby, when I'm a toddler. And I can remember thinking, well, if you're right, that's really heavy stuff.
You think he was working it out as he
he
talked
was.
to you?
He wanted someone non-controversial to try the ideas out. But I think he mostly used Mary Ainsworth for this.
She said that when she left London and went to Uganda, she was not convinced that this secure base description was necessarily a good description of infants, and she was going to find out. Not that she was going to prove it, she was going to find out. And maybe that was a quality he liked in her.
He loved that.
I mean, you can trust someone who will tell you it's not working.
Absolutely.
And he would be open to this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now, I think Jimmy Robertson had a natural flair for this sort of thing, and my father was a skilled photographer. He had photographs from when he was a child. I was through discovering his quarter-plate Sanderson camera, which was red leather and mahogany and brass, that I got into photography. And I'm sure when Jimmy said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to film these little guys going into hospital because I think we might be able to see something in the pictures. And I think my father was supportive of
When the baby in the next cot cried,
and my father said that Jimmy could do with his camera what he could never do with his pen. The 3 big volumes started with a paper that he was going to get published in one of the academic journals, which was sort of developing the nature of the child's tie. And then he said, this paper's got too long, and what I'm trying to arrange is that the journal does half of it in one issue, and then the next issue, 3 months later, they'll publish the second half. And then he came back, this went on over a period of time, and he said, actually, I think this is going to make a book. I think there's enough here to make a small book. And then he said, this is going to make a book, but the trouble is, I think it's in 2 parts. I think it's going to take 2 volumes to put this together. And then this went on over years. And he said, I think the second volume is going to have to be split into separation and loss. And that was the trilogy. And there was 5 years for each volume. But the first volume, if you like, was 50 years.
People have often commented that the first volume is ethology, control systems, evolution, working out sort of mechanisms. The second volume is more on representation, more psychological in a sense, and the third volume more difficult material. And people have felt perhaps that his thought was evolving over such a long period of 15 years.
No.
He told me one time that he had the entire
Yeah.
thing in mind from the beginning.
Yeah. By the time he got it into 3 volumes, he had all the notes for everything.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean to say that the detail couldn't be adjusted and modified in the light of new research data coming through. No, I think that's true.
Yeah. There's been controversy between people who think of the theory as a theory of dealing with emergencies and those who say that equal weight should be given to the support for exploration, preventing distress.
He was very keen on that, using the secure base that the primary attachment figure or other attachment figures can provide, allowing the person, the child, the infant, the adult, to go out and explore new experiences. He always recognized as being, I suppose, the point of having a secure base. But he really kept everybody focused on the need to have a secure base from which to go out and explore.
One of the controversies that's arisen in attachment theory and research recently has to do with the range of phenomena that attachment should bear on. Many people treat it as if it should be a theory of everything.
He would have had a terrible problem with that. I'm confident of it. He really wanted this kept as a facet of our psychology. An important facet, but only a facet. And curiously, the facet does play into quite a lot of different fields and elements of our human psychology. But it's getting a bit sexy, and people are strapping it on to whatever it is that they want to make look modern and up to date. And he would have been very upset about that, because as a good scientist, and he really, and he and Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main and you guys all have tried to hold this thing on message as a science. And that's been the power of attachment theory in the field.
I wonder what he'd think about so many people today having a fatherly image of him. He was the source of their careers.
He would be anxious
Really?
that this is getting too much of a worship. He would worry. He didn't.
Really?
He didn't like. The reason that he specifically set out to develop this as an attachment theory, not Bowlby's thoughts, the thoughts of Chairman Bowlby. This he really didn't like that. He said it's so inhibiting and limiting, because he said when I die, if it was Bowlby, that's the end of it. You cannot develop Bowlby after he's dead. You can develop attachment after I'm gone, but you can never develop Bowlby because Bowlby's not here.
A strategic
So
choice.
it was absolutely expressed specifically as a strategic choice to allow science to flourish. He said it's just going to have to take its chances, along with any other theoretical framework, to explain the data. It has stood up astonishingly well. It has been added to brilliantly. So, it hasn't stopped in its tracks. It has developed. It is truly amazing how accurate many of his predictions turn out to be. But he was very careful to make sure that what was a theoretical guess was not portrayed as fact. And that is something else which I think really we have to keep a tight grip on.
Richard, thank you.
It's a pleasure.